Welcome back to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. So we are still here working on this dress form. I knew it was a big project and I knew it was going to take a minute. Where we left off was we had carved the thing out of cardboard, and now what I needed to do was to make a paste using some of the sawdust that we had left over and the glue that we used. Sort of cover the whole thing with that and let it dry. Well, we did that and sadly lost a couple days of footage. But luckily, I'm going to have to go back in and reshape a few things, but just so you know what you missed is I took a long drill in between the thighs, drilled that through a couple times, and then once I had a little bit of a gap, I took a Sawzall, kind of cleaned it all up and made it nice and smooth inside. Then once I had, coated the whole thing, let it dry, I was looking at it and I realized I had gotten a little bit overly generous with the behind area. I don't have that much of a bubble butt. So I'm gonna have to face facts, sand that down to a slightly more realistic silhouette, repaste it so you will be seeing that. And that is what we're gonna be tackling right now. This process is pretty much the equivalent of having to show people an unphotoshopped picture of yourself after you've already posted the photoshopped picture. So there really isn't any perfect ratio for this mix. It's really just kind of what feels right. So I take a few chunks of that sawdust, the cardboard sawdust, put it in a bowl, and then just dump a heap of the glue on top of it. Mix it together with my hands. If it feels a little bit dry, I add a little bit more glue. And if it gets a little too slippery, you just add a little more sawdust. And then you just start smearing it on. Really, the objective with this is to fill any air holes in the cardboard that you see and smooth the surface as much as possible. You're not really trying to add up bulk. That said, if you do end up with any divots or dents, you can definitely use this product as kind of like a spackle to smooth those over. Once I got it looking how I wanted it to, I put a few fans on it and left it alone, I think for about a day to totally let it dry out. And then once it got to a place that I felt like it wasn't going to be damaged from sanding, I just went over the entire thing, at first with a palm sander and then also just doing a lot of hand sanding. All right, now it's time to start thinking about what fabric we're going to use to cover this thing. So there are a few things to really keep in mind here. Whatever fabric you choose is going to strongly determine how professional your finished dress form is going to look. And the reason for that is no matter how tightly you design your pattern onto this dress form, there are going to be a few puckers and bulges here and there. So if you get a fabric that will shrink down just a touch when you dampen it, it's going to give you a much more professional, seamless looking finished product. So I've purchased 4 different fabrics here. We're going to do a little bit of an experiment. I'm going to take little squares of each, pin them all down and dampen them, mark around them before I do that, and we're going to see which one does the best job. That very first square on my left is just some really inexpensive generic white fabric that I found in like a discount bin. The second one is a really good muslin that only cost a couple dollars a yard. It wasn't very expensive and I liked the color. This third one is a 100% cotton, very expensive white linen. And the last one was the most expensive. It's 100% cotton linen and it has not been bleached, so it's completely natural. I found all of these at Joann Fabrics. I was surprised to find that the bleached linen that was so pricey actually expanded once it had been dampened and then dried. Okay, so our clear contenders here are the all-natural linen and the muslin. They shrank exactly the same amount, so as far as what's going to do the job best, they are equal. The muslin is only like $2 or $3 a yard. This is like $20 a yard. I like the color of the muslin more, but I've mentioned before, I really want to make something that's going to outlive me and like be something people think is cool for a really long time. And this is going to last so much longer, I think, than this. Master paintings are painted on natural linen canvas, and I think muslin has a tendency to sort of break down over time. So this is going to be the one I'm going to go with, and we are ready to start the next part of this process. Before I commit completely, I think I want to do one last test with larger swatches of both of these fabrics. I just want to ensure that I'm not betting on the wrong horse. And it's looking like you get what you pay for. The linen is just cleaner looking and it looks like it shrank a little bit more. All right, now it's time to start drawing a pattern onto this dress form. I'm big on using whatever it is that I have around, and what I have at the moment is a tape measure that has this like laser ability. And so I'm going to essentially band-aid that to a tripod because I want really smooth, clean lines going across that I can go in and mark with a pencil or a marker. And the dress form itself, the stand, isn't perfectly level, so I'm going to shim that up a little bit with a few like nuggets of cardboard, make sure that it looks perfect, and then start drawing out this outline because you really want that to look as clean and tidy as possible because it is going to be something that shows up in the finished product. Initially, I started doing this process with a disappearing ink pen. It was really difficult to mark the cardboard and some of the lines started to disappear. I did this because I was concerned about bleed through on the top fabric. That ultimately ended up not being an issue, so a pencil was the ideal tool for this. Not all of your angles have to be perfectly horizontal or vertical. Just keep in mind if you do create something that is at an angle, just make sure that you measure that side and then match that on the opposite side so those angles are mirrored perfectly. This shoulder to neckline is not perfectly vertical, it is at an angle. It took me far too long to realize how ineffective this marker was for doing this job before I switched to a pencil. Okay, we're moving right along. Now it's time to make the pattern for this thing. I'm using this really inexpensive fabric. It doesn't have any stretch to it, which is really important. I'm gonna tear off and cut out a bunch of little sections of this and apply them to each of the sections on this dress form. I'm going to make sure each one is perfectly smooth and pin along the edges. And once I've got it there, I'm gonna fold over the sides and then just mark the creased sort of areas. Now, one thing you definitely want to do with each of these is before you go to that step, once you've cut them out, you want to spray each one with spray starch and iron them because you don't want this moving or budging at all. I've mentioned this before in a past episode, but these are my very favorite scissors. An added bonus of doing that spray starch method is when you do that and you fold the fabric anywhere, the crease holds fast. So it just generally makes this entire process a lot easier. When you do find yourself getting to sort of the rounded areas or the trickier parts, feel free to trim in some relief cuts, and that way the fabric will lay perfectly smooth. When you do get ready to start cutting these pieces out, make sure you don't add a seam allowance. We're going to deal with that later. So just cut exactly on the line. It's also a great idea to mark all of these pieces because I could just easily see a gust of wind coming through the room and messing up this puzzle. All right, now we're going to tackle what I would call the most boring part of this entire job. We are going to take all of these pieces that we've just done, lay them out on paper, draw around them, and then add about a 1/4 inch seam allowance to each of them. Now, anything that's circular, you want to mark with a little pencil where those seams come together on each side. So if it's the arm, the neck, the kneecap, wherever, because you want to be able to like trace back to this when you start sewing this thing together. This is a boring step, but it is necessary, and I will try to speed through it as quickly as possible. I'm going to have to withdraw that last comment, I think. Anytime you have a good audiobook to listen to and some cats to play with, I don't really think you can ever be completely bored. Now we get to start sewing this thing together, which is so exciting to me. Remember, no moisture, any. It will cause the fabric to shrink and will sort of undo all of this work that we've done. So I'm ironing them with no moisture, which is obnoxiously takes forever. And then we're going to start sewing little finishing stitches around each of these pieces before joining them. So here I've got that unbleached linen canvas to work with, an old lady librarian outfit on, and I'm going to iron this entire sheet of fabric out, lay down those pattern pieces one at a time, and cut them out. Something I realized early on was once you are ready to start joining these pieces together, every time you sew one piece to the next one, go and take it over to the ironing board and flatten down the seam allowance with an iron. And this kind of makes the seam look super, super clean and sharp, and the fabric lays really smoothly against the form. Another really helpful tip I can give you is when you are joining pieces together, pinning them before you start sewing is a great way to make sure that they are going to align together perfectly. And if one side seems to have a little more fabric, you can kind of pull it and tug it and then pin it, just so you work out that stuff before you get to it with an actual needle and thread. Now that we're getting ready to apply it, I'm going to trim away any loose threads beforehand. Now, if I did all of those measurements right and I was consistent and I didn't mess anything up, theoretically, this should go on and fit like a glove. The very first step is to just stick a few pins in just to get the fabric to hold back. And then once you have started doing that and started pulling it pretty taut, you can start folding over the side and then pinning that so you end up with a pretty clean seam. If I'm being honest, not every project comes together this smoothly. So when it does happen and it looks this clean, I feel so happy. So now that we're here, it's time to do something called an invisible stitch to seal this up. My thread is doubled over for strength, and you enter on one side, go up maybe a 1/4 inch, pull out, and then go over exactly across from there. And go up about a 1/4 inch and go out and just keep going. It looks a little bit like a ladder as you go up, and every like 5 or 6 stitches you can tighten it up as you go. All right, we're gonna stop right here. Don't kill me. Another episode is coming next week that features the finishing of this entire job. And I've saved all the best parts for last. I was actually going to power through and finish this thing, but then I was in the woodworking stage and I realized I needed to stop, wrap this up at this point, and then give you guys a little bit of a teaser. Next week, we do all of the fun stuff. So it's not gonna be this color anymore. You're gonna see what happens when you dampen it. We're gonna be adding wood adornments and all sorts of extra little fancy things. So thank you so much for your patience. The next episode is my favorite easily. So stay tuned and I'll see you again very soon.